I say welcome back to Yerushalmi Kilayim. We are Perik Shishi Alach Dalet, which is Daf Nun Ches Amud Beis. Now, we've spoken in the past about a vineyard where part of it is now desolate. So now we're going to talk about an oris. Remember, oris is the trees which are alongside the fences, yeah? Which now from the middle of it has got destroyed. So we will explain. So Piskei oris, which we're going to explain. The share of it is 8 amas v'oid, 8 amas and a bit, right? So the bit is really a tefach. So we're going to talk about these trees which are parallel to a wall, and if there's a gap there, you can plant other things. We'll see. Whenever the Chachamim said of measure with a vineyard, you don't usually find the bit. Except with Piskei Oris, where you've got this broken hole between the vines next to the wall, where we have 8 amas and a bit. Piskei Oris, what are these? Oris shachora me'em sa'oi. So you had, let's say, 11 vines next to a wall, and then the middle vine is now destroyed. So you have 5 and 5, and you have a gap. You had 5 vines on one side and 5 vines on the other side of the wall. And now you have 2 lots of 5, and the place desolate between them is called Piskei Oris. Okay? Im yesh sham shmeina amas. So if in the place which is the empty space between them, if you've got 8 amas, that's not enough. Lo yavi zera l'sham. Don't bring other seeds there. However, if you have in that empty space shmeina amas v'oid, 4 amas and a bit, which is really a tefach, you give each area its own work, which is 4 amas for each side, and then you're allowed to sow some seeds in the middle. So if it's 8 amas and a tefach, 4 amas that way, 4 amas that way, you've got a tefach in the middle where you can sow other things. So this is, you have 2 walls at an L shape, let's say. So 2 walls at an angle, and you have 5 vines coming from one side, 5 vines coming from the other side. So then you give each one its work of 6 tefachim, and you can sow the remainder. Rabbi Yossi said, if you don't have 4 amas, don't start bringing any other seeds there. So here, the first opinion says 6 tefachim, right? He says the vines are sort of raised on reeds, okay. Is that brought down as normal or what? Yeah, okay. Okay. Rabbi Yossi said if you don't have 4 amas, okay. According to Rabbi Yossi, you can't sow in a surrounded area where there's a vine if you don't have 4 amas, because the place is bottled to the vine, okay. Right, okay. So it's like consider, because remember you've got 2 walls and then the vines, they're sort of surrounded. It's like a mukaf area, according to one explanation. You see, it's considered enclosed area, and that's why it requires a bigger gap between them. Our Tana, however, held that when it's in this shape, it's not got a din of oris. Oris is when you have 5 vines on one straight line, right? 5 and 5, so you distance 6 tefachim over here, and you can sow the area between. Right? They also bring down what is the shear of distancing with an oris. Now, according to the Tanakama, it's like a vineyard. You need 4 amas. Ben Nuri said it's 6 tefachim, like a single vine. Right? So the question is, you're distancing 4 amas and sowing the extra. That's like the Tanakama. According to Ben Nuri, it would be 6 tefachim and then sow the extra. Some say that everyone holds the distance of 6 tefachim. Everyone holds with this, because the distance of 4 amas with the oris was said with sowing parallel to the vines or behind the vines, but if it's to the side of the vines, maybe it's only 6 tefachim. Alright, let's carry on. If you have sticks that are coming out from the other sticks and reeds in this oris, and you basically, again, it's this sort of trellis here, but you don't want to cut them because you want to put more branches on them. So you don't, but that's not the reason here. So here you don't want to put more branches. You just don't want to cut these sticks that are sticking out. Okay, So basically the vines are on these reeds which are interwoven, and there are some which come out longer than the other reeds. So some reeds come out longer. So what do? You don't really want to cut them for the sake of the sticks. So Kenegdan, underneath them, Mutal Israel, underneath those extensions, you're allowed to sow, because it's not got a din of the sticks that you're putting vines on. Arsan, if however you made them in order for more twigs or branches to grow on it, also then it's forbidden, because it's got a din of these branches which are set aside for the vines. You got a new growth of a vine coming outside the area of the vines. So we treat this new growth, as it were, kilu metulteles, as if it's tluyabot. You imagine as if you've got a plumb line coming straight down, or kenegda, and under that, also you're not allowed to sow anything. So you've got maybe an extra growth further down, right? So usually from the oris you have to distance 4 amas or 6 tvachim. But the Mishnah is telling you, what about a new branch which has gone outside the area of the work of the oris? Some extra branch has come out somewhere. So we're saying, well, you can't sow anything underneath it. And the same thing with a single vine which is on reeds where part of it's come out, you mustn't sow under it. And if you tie a branch from like one vine to another, tachta also underneath it is forbidden to sow. Well, from the side it's okay, right? There's no chiddush that underneath it you can't sow. It's the same as some plants, whatever, coming up. But we'll see.
You're like a trellis.
It is. But you've done it not on sticks. You've done it from one vine to another. That's what we'll see. We'll see. Yeah, but we'll see why you've done it. We'll see. Sivka b'chevel begemi, because if the thing was shorter, if the branch didn't go all the way to the other tree, and you tied it with rope at the one side to make it long enough to reach the next tree, then tachas hasipuk, under the rope, mutter, you're allowed to sow. However, also if however you made this long rope for the branch to go across it and spread out, then you're not allowed to sow underneath it, because then it's like the sticks that you set aside. So that's the chiddush here, that if you've tied the end of it with rope, then under the rope you're still okay to sow other things. And we said in our Mishnah, Piskei Oris. So this is where usually we said an oris you mustn't bring 8 hammers, you mustn't bring any other seeds, but you can have an oris where, let's say, one of the vines has disappeared, you've got an open area, there's 8 hammers between the vines, and we can less hadar pliga. Now our Mishnah equates this with Rav Zira, but the Gemara says less hadar pliga Rav Zira. Now this seems to argue on Rav Zira. Let's see. Rav Zira, we have quoted him before. He said you have 2 rows of vines where you've got a gap of 8 hammers, they don't join up to become a vineyard. Shmoina, now when he said 8 hammers, is measured chutz mimakom crossing. You got it on there? Yeah. Chutz mimakom crossing, apart from the stumps of the vines. So the dinner between the vines needs to be a gap of 8 hammers. According to Reb Zeira, the 4 hammers are measured apart from the stumps of the vines. Right? Chutz mimakom crossing, that's what he said there. Now our Mishnah tells you a desolate area in this oris where there's only 8 hammers seems to argue on Rav Zira. According to him, you can't get a situation where the geffen is uprooted and there's only 8 hammers there, because usually you need 8 hammers and a bit more, because of the stump itself. You need 8 hammers plus the width of the tree that was there. Now Amisha says 8 hammers. So Amisha seems to hold a gap of 4 hammers between the vines, that includes the stump area, and that's not like Reb Zeira. So the Gemara answers Pasala, he can explain the Mishnah when he says a gap of 8 hammers, it means 8 hammers, Shmoina hammers for kosher, 8 hammers and the stump area, which has now disappeared. So why didn't the Mishnah say 8 hammers and a bit more? He says, do you not hold Kahida Amrav Yochanan? Now whenever the Chachamim said and a bit more, it's always a tefach, right? It's always a tefach, always. Now, just like we said, you have 8 hammers and a bit, you work the 4 hammers, you have a tefach left. Okay. So basically, Vahan Riba Tzivcha, he says this extra bit is a small amount. I mean, the shear of the stump has to be at least a tefach. Because if the stump was a tefach, then the area of the desolate area is 8 hammers and a tefach. And then you can sow that. So it's only a small amount extra. That's why the Tana didn't mention it. It just said if there's 8 hammers, don't bring other seeds. But really he meant 8 hammers and a bit more, right? Which is the area of the stump. He meant a bit more as well. Now, then we said in our Mishnah that whenever you have the Chachamim give there's no va'oids anywhere except Piskei Oris. Right? This is the only example you got 8 hammers and a bit. In Kilayim, you don't find it anywhere else. Now, Rabbi Yochanan Bai, he asked, Lama les nan omrin? Why do we not say, Kol midas she'amru Chachamim ein bohen shir, ein bohen va'oid? Why don't we say, look, whenever the Chachamim gave sizes, they never said it a bit more, chutz Piskei Oris, except for Piskei Oris. Now, what did the Tana say? He said, all the measures in a vineyard, you don't find an extra bit. But why didn't he say, all measures, you don't find an extra bit? Why say all measures in a vineyard? Why didn't he say all measures? It sounds like that elsewhere you might find examples of bits. Now he says, do you or not? So he says, V'artanina. No, wait a minute. We do find other bits. V'artanina. We've learned, now the loaves of a nazir is barley. Aseres kabin Yerushalmim, and it's 10 kav Yerushalmi, based on the measure of Yerushalmi. Shehen shisha Esraelin vu'id vuyan, which is 6/10 of an ephah and a bit more. So based on that measure in the midbar, so you see elsewhere the Chachamim use the word va'oid. So the Tana was right in saying all measures in a vineyard you don't find va'oid. So what's Rav Yona's question? It makes sense why the Mishnah said what it does, because you find other va'oids elsewhere. So the Gemara answers, Tamam, in Menachos, Lemidos is talking about volume, whereas Khan, here we're talking about length, Amos, right? And we don't find it elsewhere in Amos, so why didn't he say all measures? But Hartanina, we learned in the Mishnah about Truma mixed with Chulin. Rabbi Lezer said Truma gets Batel in 101. Rabbi Yeshua said 100 and a bit, and that bit is only a bit. And Rabbi Yosef ben Meshulam, he says Va'oid, Kav le'mea sa, it's 1 kav to 100 sa, which is shtuslim damea, which is a sixth out of a sa of truma, which is making a mixture of sa and 6 kav. So we find again a measure of a bit as far as truma is concerned. Therefore, the Mishnah couldn't have said all measures there's no va'id, because with truma we find this 100 and a bit. So tamam, but again there it's talking about the midos, it's for volume. Whereas Ka'an La'amos here we're talking about length. So therefore we could have said it. So the Gemara says, to push away Rabbi Yona's question, Ba'atanina, we've learnt in Erevin, as far as carrying on Shabbos in a large area, Amr Rav Yehuda ben Bava, Hagina Ba'akapa of these various parks and gardens, Shehi Shivim B'Shirayim, remember 5,000 Amers is 70 and a bit, 17 2/3 times 17 2/3, right? Shehi Shivim B'Shirayim, Al Shivim B'Shirayim, we mentioned a bit. And you're allowed to carry in there within that size, providing that there's a guard there, whatever, it's a place of living. So you see, as far as the length, there's a mention of a bit. And therefore, the Tana was right in saying all measures in a vineyard you don't find bit, because elsewhere we do find bits. Shmuel said, B'Sheni Shlishi Amar Shanu. He says, actually, the bit mentioned in Erevin is 2/3 of an Amma. So it's not the bit. It's not the same as Va'oid in our Mishnah. Our Mishnah, Va'oid is a tefach. Right? And there is maybe 2/3 of an amma. So we don't find Va'oid where it's just a tefach. So the question comes back. Why does the Tana in our Mishnah why doesn't he say all measures why does he have to say all measures in a vineyard? Because there is 2/3. So he could have said all measures you don't find a bit. It's a very good question, but we have no answer. The Yerushalmi actually went along a bit there. Again, it was like, it kept it going, It didn't give up straight away. Some blend of Pshat the Gemara differently. We're pushing away Rav Yona's question. 70 and 2/3, it brings Shmuel. The Shiraim is 2/3 of an Amma. So you see the bit also mentions with Amma, and therefore Rav Yona's question is pushed away. We do find Va'oid with a measure elsewhere, and that's why the Mishnah said all measures in a vineyard. So some say that that's the answer, really. Alright. And what is the din now of this group of vines where the middle one is destroyed and you have 5 on one side, 5 on the other? Below Shania, there's no difference between Shabana Geda, but if you build the wall, V'achach nota achas esrei gefanim. Then you planted the 11 vines. Bein shenota achas esrei gefanim. V'achach banu gada. Or you build the wall after the vines. V'achach nisika hemsais. And the middle vine disappears, gets uprooted. In all these cases, yeshkan oris, yeshkan piske oris. So whether you built the fence first or whether you built the vines first, before the middle vine got uprooted, there's a din oris here, and once it's cut, it's got a din of piske oris. So when you've got that 8 hammers and a bit in between, you can sow other things there. Harav ageda, if the wall gets destroyed, enkan oris lo piske oris. So if the wall got destroyed before the middle vine, there's no din oris. If the fence got destroyed after the middle vine got destroyed, there's no din piske oris. So it doesn't look like a vineyard at all, right? So only because next to a wall it's got this chumrah and it's like a vineyard. You follow? But now that everything's disappeared, it isn't. So the din of piske oris is there were 11 vines next to the wall and the middle vine got destroyed. If from the beginning you planted 5 on there, and 5 on the other side, and there was an empty place in the middle, there's no din piske oris. There's no din of this 8 hammer gap. Rav Avudna, Achor Rabbi Yossi Bai, he asked, or some actually have a girsa that he actually said it, and not that he asked, but anyway. Chaza Banaya Atama Chaza Oris Dim Kaima. Now this din of oris, if let's say the wall was destroyed, but then you rebuild the wall, then the din comes back. The oris din comes back with all its restrictions. So we've learned the din of an oris is even if you depart the vines first and then you build the wall. But what about would you say the same thing with the broken oris? If the wall got destroyed and then you rebuilt it, the din piske oris comes back to what it was. So if you had a piske oris, you had this gap and the wall's destroyed and then you rebuild it, does it come back the din of piske oris again? Or do we say, look, once a new wall is rebuilt, it's as if there's 2 separate orises at the side of the wall. There's no din piske oris. Piske oris is where there was a vine that's destroyed, right? There was 5 and 5 and 1 in the middle. But maybe now there was 5 and 5, 1 in the middle. The 1 got taken off. The wall got taken off. Maybe you rebuild the wall. Maybe they're just 2 lots of 5. And it's not this chumrah of this 11 anymore. Right? Maybe that din doesn't come back when you rebuild the wall. Rabbi Yosef Shem Rabbi Yochanan said, Master's the story, Shasar Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, he burnt Kilayim ben Ginar, Benag Nigar, in a place like that. But Masaraf, what did he burn? Piske Oris Saraf. These things were broken that were planted in Piske Oris. So they planted there without having 8 hammers and a tefach, and he burnt those vines and seeds. Rav Chiv Rabbi Yochanan, he said, Master Shasaraf Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, he burnt Benag Nigar. And what did he burn? Beina Oris Lageda, between the actual trees and the wall, or vine, saraf, that's what he burns. So they planted things between the tree and the wall, without there being 4 amas, which is the shear that's required. And he burnt the vines and the seeds. Rabbi Yossi says, Kashai to come Rabbi Yaakov Baruch. He says, Nicha, I understand that he burnt Piske Oris saraf. Rabbi Yaakov ben Nuri, he burnt the things in between, because there's a chidush. But Direi Chachamim Chalukin Alav. The Chachamim argue, they said that Piske Oris don't become forbidden. So he wanted to burn it like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri's opinion. Fair enough. But according to Rabbi Chia's version, that the story was that the Kilayim was Bein Oris Legeder, so it was between the trees and the wall. That was the area. Why is Rabbi Yochanan telling us this? Direi Chachamim Chalukin Alav. Do the Chachamim argue on this? No one argues on this. If you don't have 4 amas between the trees and the wall, and you go and sow there, everything's forbidden. So of course he burns it. So why tell me this? But Lo Shemia, now Rabbi Yossi never heard Rabbi Yaakov Baracha, what Rabbi Yaakov Baracha said, and that's why, the Gemara says, but actually he'd not heard what Rabbi Yaakov Baracha said. So he asked against the second Girsa. Because Rabbi Yaakov Baracha said, it's Palgun Rabbi Yochanan Shimon Lakish. It's an argument. Oris Atzmai, the 4 amas around the trees. Ma'ah, what's the din? Does it become forbidden or not? Rabbi Yochanan Amar Asur Makadesh, it's forbidden and it becomes, it's Asur. You can't sow there, and if you did, it's forbidden. But Shlakish Rama, he said, you mustn't sow there, but Ba'ena Makadesh, if you did sow there, it doesn't become forbidden. Because he held only 6 tvachim makes it forbidden, like a single vine. So the same thing according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri then, that area between the tree and the fence, according to Rabbi Yochanan is forbidden, according to Shlakish is not forbidden. So based on this, you understand why Rabbi Yochanan had to say Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri burned the fruit of Kilayim between the tree and the fence in order to go against the view of Rish Lakish, because according to him the fruit doesn't become awesome. So that's why he's telling you this thing, because others say it's not forbidden, right? He's saying even between the tree and the fence it becomes forbidden for others because Rish Lakish held differently. We said if you have an aris, remember the wall is going at an L shape, and you've got trees coming one way, trees coming the other way, 5 vines from this side, 5 vines from that side. You give the avodah 6 tefachim and you sow the rest. So an oris made in this shape has not got din oris, right? You're allowed to sow next to the vines as long as you distance 6 tefachim. You need to have an area of at least 4 tefachim, distance 6 tefachim from the vines, but you've got to have at the end of the wall. So he's learning 4 vacant amas. 4 vacant amas of vines, a significant area. Otherwise, the wall is batel to the vines. So therefore you have to distance it 6 tefachim from the end of the wall. Now here, just checking the girsa here. What's your girsa there? I mean, he says here, you should have at the corner 4 tefachim, k'nei makom chashuv. And then in the notes, just underneath, it says, Kilayim the hetis to sow Rosh Gefanim, a distance 6 tefachim, in a mikra where you have at the end of the wall 4 vacant amas of vines. Is it 4 amas or is it 4 tefachim? I think it sounds like 4 tefachim, doesn't it? Yeah? In note 7, he says a shatach of 4 tefachim is considered a makom choshev. An area of 4 tefachim is a significant area. So in this wording, they're saying 4 amas, whether that needs looking at. I'm not so sure what this Gerson needs looking at. Okay. It sounds like it's 4 tefachim. Clearly says 4 tefachim there? Yeah? Okay. Now with Brahma Mishnah brings another argument about an aris which comes out of a wall from a keren. Rabbi Yossi said, if you don't have 4 amas, you shouldn't bring any other seeds. Okay, so Rabbi Yossi holds, let's see this again. So Rabbi Yossi says if you don't have 4 amas, don't bring any other seeds. Rabbi Yossi holds an area surrounded which has got a vine, right? If you don't have 4 amas, you mustn't sow there. Okay, so the one is going to ask these words we've seen elsewhere. So Rabbi Yossi required an area of 4 amas. So let's see. We've learnt in our Mishnah the view of Rabbi Yossi that you mustn't sow in a surrounded area where there's a vine if you don't have 4 amas. Now we've learnt earlier on his words as well. Now there it was talking about a vine inside a press or in a cleft, right? A hole in the ground or something. We brought Rabbi Yossi that if you don't have 4 amas, don't bring any other seeds, right? Because the 2 halachas are similar. So here we're saying in the enclosed area you must have a gap of 4 amas. And there we're saying in the hole in the ground or in the rock, whatever you need, in the press, you need 4 amas. So why do we mention the same thing twice? So if we have learned the view of Rabbi Yossi in our Mishnah, we wouldn't have learned his words in the Mishnah over there. We would have said hacha with an oris coming from a wall into a vineyard, into a corner, right? An oris which is at the corner. Hilchas oris at Omar Asu. Because there's like 5 next to the wall, 5 vines. It's Hilchas Oris, okay, you mustn't sow. It's like an enclosed area of, you need 4 amas. But Tamam, that's 1 vine in a press or something. Hilchas Oris. It's not this din of Hilchas Oris, there's 5 vines. There's no 5 vines, there's 1 vine. Maybe you might think, Atama Mutter. Maybe Rabbi Yossi would agree, you're allowed to sow even if you don't have 4 amas. That's why we need to mention there that Rabbi Yossi requires you any surrounding area where there's a vine without nothing to do with Hilchas Oris, you need 4 amas, and the other way around. If, however, we would learn Rabbi Yossi in the Mishnah there that the vine that's in a vat or in the press, whatever it is, and we didn't learn it here with the Oris coming from the wall. I would say Taman there the vine is surrounded from all sides, right? The walls of the press, right? Therefore, therefore you're not allowed to say if you don't have 4 amas. But here in our Mishnah, because the sowing area is not surrounded from 4 sides, there's only walls on 2 sides. Therefore, I might have thought, according to Rabbi Yossi, you're allowed to sow in that area even though you don't have 4 amas. So we need to mention it there, and we need to mention it here. Okay? You've got a new growth of a vine coming beyond the area of the oris. We look at it as if there's a stick going all the way down and you mustn't sow underneath it. Taman Amrin, in Bavel they would say, we don't look at the new branch as it's all folded up. We measure it as if it would be if you stretched it. Yeah, as if there was a stick stopping it bending. And you mustn't sow under all the length of it what it would be if it was stretched out. But Shiva Ba'aba, he said, Nikman. No, you only mustn't sow until the area where it's folded up. Just underneath it as it is now. Not how it would be if it was stretched. Rav Chama, now also we said, sowing under a vine is forbidden, even beyond 6 tfachim. The Gemara says if the sowing is under, let's say, the grapes and the leaves are coming out from the branch, they considered sowing under the vine. Under sort of the clusters coming from a branch, also Makadish, you mustn't sow there. If you did, it's forbidden. Tachas alin, under the leaves coming from the branch, ideally you shouldn't sow there, but if you did, it doesn't become forbidden. They're not considered the main part of the vine. Harav Yosef said, even under the vine, it is still forbidden, and it is also. Okay. Yes. Let's carry on. Right. Sometimes you bring the branches and you put them back in the ground. You bend them over and put them back in the ground. It's called havracha. You're going to bend branches of a vine and you're going to cut it, and so part of it will be hidden from view, right? And then it will come up somewhere else. So you're sort of bending it down into the ground. It goes underground and then it comes out a bit further away. And it grows like a tree in its own right. So what about sowing on top of these branches which are in the ground? So mavrich is a gefen ba'aretz. What's the best word for mavrich? What's the English word for it?
It's a layer.
A what?
A layer.
A layer.
Yeah.
To layer the vine in the ground.
Yeah.
If you layer the vine in the ground, if you don't have earth on top of it, 3 tfachim, do not bring any other seeds on top of it, right? Because the roots of that will start going into the branches, and it's again the zraim with the tree, which is forbidden. Afilu ivricha bidlas obasilon. And even if before you put it in the ground, you sort of wrapped it up with a bit of pumpkin skin or whatever, or some sort of pipe, you shouldn't do it because, again, they'll make a hole through those things anyway. If you enveloped it in some hard rock material, you only have 3 finger breadths of earth on top of it, you're allowed to bring seeds on top. Because the roots of the zera can't start going into the rock. They won't break into the rock. Now, you have to distance seeds from a single vine 6 tfachim, okay? And usually you measure 6 tfachim from the roots of the vine. Now, in some cases you'll measure 6 tfachim slightly differently. So, al-kuva shebegefen, a vine that's growing and it's bent, so as soon as it comes out of the ground, it bends back and it sort of goes along the ground elsewhere. And then, so it's on the ground, it's coming up, and then it's like a bent knee. So as soon as it comes out, it doesn't grow upwards, it bends, goes across the ground to elsewhere, and then it straightens somewhere else. Right? Ein moededin, you don't measure the 6 tfachim from the second root, so the area where it starts being upright, not from the area it comes out to the ground. Now, the Mishnah said if you did bring a vine into the ground and you don't have 3 tfachim above it, you cannot sow there. You shouldn't put any sows on top of it. But on the side of that branch, which is underground, you're allowed to put seeds there. What are we talking about? If you're worried about seeds with trees, you're worried the roots of the seed will go into the branches and be over the Isar cover of crossbreeding them. Why is it a problem with vines? I feel any tree is a problem. You're worried about the work. You have to distance seeds from the avoida of the vine, right? And even though it's hidden in the ground, you have to give it a bit of space. Then it's neshisha. Then we should have mentioned 6 tfachim, just like normally it's 6 tfachim from the vine. So you should be 6 tfachim deep underground before it's allowed. And the Mishnah holds Rabbi Kiva Amar, he said, Shleisha, The Shir Bavoida, he learned the normal size distance you have to distance is 3 tvachim. So therefore here as well, now it's underground, you've got 3 tvachim over that, of earth, then it's okay. Then it was, wait a minute, if you're saying the reason is because the Shir Bavoida is 3 tvachim, Kribakiva, then afilu min hasadnis nishlosha. Then the Mishnah should tell you this din, you mustn't sow other seeds even on the side of the branch. You've got to have a distance of 3 tvachim. But it's also Kedei Avodah. Why the Mishnah only forbids you on top of it, but doesn't forbid you on the side. It must be that the branch in the ground, you don't give it any work at all. So the question comes back, why is it you can't sow on top of it? The reason why you can't sow is because there is a special issur in sowing seeds on top of a branch of vines, because they're very soft, and the roots will mix together, right? So that's why the Mishnah doesn't forbid you to sow on the side. When you sow on the side, you have to worry about the roots going into the branch, okay? Because the roots will go straight down, right? They're not going to move to the sides. Now, what about, if that's the case, that the roots of the seeds won't go to the sides? We learned about Masra. We distance the seeds. There's macharesha and the use of the plow. There's meiraglaim and pouring out the urine. Don't start pouring urine at foundations of a wall of someone. At least leave a 3 tvachim gap. Because if you do that within 3 tvachim, it will ruin the foundations. Rav Yirmiyah says, Rav Chaim Baruch Makshe, he asked the contradiction. Tamanin in Kilayim, with that Mishnah, Atama, he's saying, the roots don't start going to the side. And that's why we don't forbid you to sow on the side of the branch. But here, Mishnah Bab Basra, you have to distance the seeds from the wall. Atama, we say Shirashin, that the roots of the seeds, Mahalchid Minatzad, they go from the sides, and that the reason why you have to distance the seeds from the wall is because we're worried the roots will go to the side, to the wall, and weaken the foundations. No, both cases, everyone agrees. The roots don't go to the side. Allah, he says the reason why we forbid you to put seeds in the ground near a wall, basically they will go deep into the ground, they will weaken the ground underneath, and that causes the ground around, the ground that's supported with a wall to weaken and start shaking. And that will cause damage to the foundations. So basically going down, they will break the earth up, and that will affect the foundations. And I'll prove it to you, that even from afar, from the wall, it can get damaged. The Tanina Taman, we've learned in Basra, you also have to distance meraglaim, urine, from the wall, 3 tvachim. Meraglaim ma'achim and atzad. Does the urine going within 3 tvachim spread to the sides and reach the wall? It will get absorbed in the ground straight away. So it must be the reason why you have to distance it from the wall is because the ground is in the place where it was spilled. That's where it becomes weak in that area. You see, and that will affect the foundations. Now we bring another raya of the Mishnah for the text of Rabbi Yossi. He asked on Rav Chaim Bar Ukva, who asked the question about Tanina Machresha. And we also learned you have to distance the plow 3 tvachim from the wall. Do you honestly think the plow will spread to the side, reach the wall? It won't. It must be that the chiyuv to leave 3 tvachim from the plow to the wall is again because the weakening of the ground under the plow, will weaken the foundations of the wall. So you see from our Mishnah, like Rabbi Yossi, that weakening the ground from the distance, from the wall, also causes a damage to the wall. Okay, how are we doing? Right, we learned in the Mishnah, if you put a vine in the ground, and you don't have 3 tvachim of earth upon it, then you mustn't sow on top of it. And even if you surrounded it with pumpkin material, or whatever it is, or some sort of pipe. That's if it's an earthenware pipe, that's no good. So the roots will just break through it. However, if it's lead, is that what they call it?
Yep.
It's a lead one. You don't need 3 tvachim above it. You don't need that. Even less than that is permitted because it's not going to break through that. If you put it in a rock, even if you've got 3 tvachim of earth, you're allowed to sow. That's with a hard rock, where the roots won't go breaking through. But if it's a soft one, the rock will just break up when the roots get there, and so that's no good. a vine that's growing and it's bent, so you've brought it and it's moving to the side. But as it comes from the ground, it goes straight along the ground and then rises elsewhere. So we measure the shear from the new second root. High, and that is Kashaina Rishon Nira, when the first one is not noticeable on the ground. Right? It didn't grow much at the first time, and then it goes along the ground and grows at the second time. Okay? And then in this situation, it's not noticeable where it comes out, it's noticeable where it grows properly, and we measure the avodah from that second place. If the first one was noticeable, then nice and shisha tvachim, you have to give an allowance of 6 tvachim lekan around the first root, the shisha tvachim lekan, and 6 tvachim on the second area. Okay, I'll prove it to you. To Tanin and Basra, we've learned in the Mishnah, after our Mishnah, it says Hamavrich Shlosha Gefanim. If you put 3 vines, now this is you're putting 3 vines into the ground and they come up later, right? 3 vines, and you're putting them back in, laying them back into the ground. So near Nirin, and the original vines are noticeable, and the ones that come out again are noticeable. So you look like you have 3, but it looks like 6 now. But Tani Allah Nirin. So if they're noticeable, it looks like you've got 2 rows of 3. So if you have from 4 amas to 8 amas, they join up to be a vineyard. And you can't sow within 4 amas around it, like a vineyard. If it's less than 4 or more than 8, they don't join up. But Tanya, we've learnt on this, but when was this said Leinian? That's as far as joining up for a keren, for a vineyard. That you don't have to distance them 4 amas like you did of a vineyard. But as far as avodah, as far as giving them an area of work around it, that then applies even normal vines, right? You have to have a shear of 6 tvachim. But even if there is 4 amas or more from 8 amas, nice and shisha tvachim lekan, you need to give an area of 6 tvachim for this part, the shisha tvachim lekan, and 6 tvachim for that part. Right? You have to leave 6 tvachim around the new vines and the original vines. So for each of them. So we see here, the same thing with a vine which has been bent over, like a knee, that if the main first one is noticeable, then you have to distance 6 tvachim even from the first root. And when the Mishnah says you only measure from the second one, that's talking about a case where the first one is not noticeable when it comes out of the ground. Okay, let's carry on. Mavrich shlosha gefanim. If you put into the ground these 3 vines into the ground, and then you create a new row of 3 vines, bikreyen near it, and the original ones are noticeable. Rabbi Elazar of Sadok he says, if you have between them between 8 and 4 and 8 amas apart, as they join up to form a vineyard, and therefore you need a distance of 4 amas. And if not, they don't join up. Now, what happens? Geffen sheyavsha. If you have a vine, you mustn't sow a vine that's dried out. Asura ve'ena mekadeshes. You mustn't sow other seeds next to it. But if you did, the vine does not forbid what grew. Minatora, you're allowed to sow next to a dried out vine. Right, the Chachamim were worried maybe you'll make a mistake and think, oh, this is not dried out. But the Chachamim didn't forbid any growth that you ended up with. Rabbi says, Avsema gefen also. Even sort of cottonwool plant, which looks a bit like vines. Yeah? We're worried people make a mistake. It's forbidden, but you mustn't sow seeds next to it, but it doesn't forbid what grows there. The Chachamim weren't machmir in that respect. Rabbi Elazar of Sadok Mishmai said the name of Meir, Afal Gabe Agefen also, on top of the vine you mustn't sow, but it doesn't forbid. So that means even above it, maybe an airspace above it somehow. I don't know. Even, he says here, yeah, we'll discuss it. Eilu Asurian V'lo Mekabshin. The following are forbidden to sow seeds, but they don't forbid. Moisa Chorban. You know what? I think we'll carry on this next time. Alright then, okay. They don't forbid what grows, let's see. Moisa Chorban Akeren. So if you have a desolate area in a vineyard, not next to the vines, so you've got like that gap in the middle, from the middle of the vineyard, it's an empty space, and it's less than 16 amas, you mustn't sow other seeds there. If you did, then what you sowed within 4 amas of the vineyard is forbidden, but what's extra outside that is not forbidden. Moisa Machol Karem, that's part of the area, remember, around the vineyard, next to the walls, not near the vine. We said an area of Machol Karem, that's the area surrounding the vineyard, between the walls around it. If it's a gap of less than 12 amas, you mustn't sow there, but if you did, what's within 4 amas closest to the vineyard is forbidden. What's outside the 4 amas is not forbidden. And then Moisa Piske Oris, which we spoke about today, when it's not near the vines. So we said already, if you have a gap in the 5 vines and 5 vines and a gap in the middle, there were 11, there's now 10, and that gap is less than 8 amas and a tefach, you mustn't sow other seeds. If you did sow there, then that which you sowed within 6 tefachim close to the vine is forbidden. What is the moisa leftover area is permitted, and there we're not forbidden. And moisa pipioros is what's left from the trellises, the sticks coming out, not near the vines. So we said if you put vines on these sticks, you mustn't sow under those sticks, even if they carry on past the vine. But if you did sow there underneath it, only what's under the vine is forbidden. What's further on down is not forbidden. Abotachas a geffen under a vine, avodas a geffen, or the 6 tefachim around a single vine, the arba amas shebekeren, and 4 amas next to a vineyard. In all these 3 places, not only are not allowed to sow there, but if you did, hareilem mekachin, this would be forbidden. Okay, to be continued.